Welcome to Project Geekology, coming to you from Columbus, Ohio, in the Stacks. We are actually broadcasting from the Oasis, and I am one half of your host, Anthony, and joining me, as always, is...
Dakota. Yes, we are in 2045 for this episode.
Yes.
We're going to be discussing Ernest Cline's book, Ready Player One, as well as the film adaptation in 2018 by Steven Spielberg, which is just such a weird thing to even conceive. But here we are, 2020. I mean, 2045.
2045. Hopefully we have a lot of listens by then. I'm pretty excited about this topic. It's a fun book and it's a fun movie. So before we get into that, as always, we like to talk about our weeks. Dakota, how has your week been? Oh, and before we actually jump into that, sorry for the late episodes. We've actually had some pretty busy weeks, and this weekend I leveled up to 29. So I was doing things with friends and family, and so we were busy. But we promised to give you an amazing episode this week, as well as next week. We actually have our next episode planned out. So yes, next week we will be releasing Jurassic Park. As you know, Dakota has released a video about the making of Jurassic Park, so you definitely need to go check that out on Geekritique. That episode will be a nice complement to that video. So now with that being said, Dakota, how was your week? How have you been?
Good, yeah, and like you said, it's been 2 weeks since we've released an episode, so we've had a little bit of time to do a bunch of other stuff. I have no idea what I did last week, but I do know what I did this week. And this week I did a lot of actually I do know what I did last week. Like you said, I released that video. It was a project that I was just putting like a lot of time into.
Yeah.
I did a lot of research. I read both the actual novel Jurassic Park as well as this like making of book that's still on my desk. It's a huge big old thing, and I made a big video about like the making of Jurassic Park and like the dinosaurs. So we'll talk more about that in the next episode. But this week I was sticking in the Steven Spielberg thing, and I wanted to watch Indiana Jones. Jen has always been a fan of Indiana Jones, and I've always been a fan of Indiana Jones, but we've never watched it together. So we were just like, all right, let's just dive into it. I don't think I've watched Temple of Doom since I was like under the age of 10, so it's been several decades since I've seen Temple of Doom. And watching the first three at least back to back, we did like one every night. That was a lot of fun. It was good catching up on those films. Those are absolute classics and some of Spielberg's best work.
I enjoy Indiana Jones a lot. It's a great series to sit down and watch every once in a while. Same with Back to the Future. Love visiting those films also. And those are topics that I think we could talk about in the future.
Yeah. Anthony, what did you do this past week?
This week, a lot of work and also preparing for our episodes. I wanted to refresh a little bit on the book. I had watched Ready Player One, the film, and it's always fun to watch that film. I've seen it a few times now, maybe like 4 times. It was fun coming back to it, and I like being able to sit a film to the side and come back to it after a while and then notice new things about it. And this one, there's so much going on in it, especially the scenes where there's tons of characters in it, that you want to just pause it or really just look back into those scenes over and over to see who you can pick out. And so I've been doing that and playing video games as usual. So I've been really wanting to get back into World of Warcraft because we got Shadowlands coming out. They have the Shadowlands pre-patch that's out, and so I'm actually planning on diving into that. I got some game time today, so I'm pretty excited about that. I think it's going to be fun. Dakota, I think you should join me again sometime. Nice. Because it's been too long.
I know, I have to dust off my characters. Shadowlands, is that the new expansion?
Shadowlands is the new expansion. They've changed some stuff. They actually did a level squish if I'm right, it's down to 60 now. They went back down to 60.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm assuming there's still a huge, like... Now it's like a huge jump every level, basically. In terms of... How do you even manage that? It's so confusing.
I believe that the new level is going to be 60, so we're kind of going back in time to... Which has me a little bit interested because that might mean that the leveling is going to slow down again. And I remember how painful it was to level up from 1 to 60 in Vanilla WoW. It probably won't be as bad. See, I've done a little bit of research into it, but not too much that
you can like explain it to people.
Yeah, exactly. So not too much to where I can explain too much. If you guys have the answer, let us know on Twitter.
Yes, how exactly does this level squish work? I need to know. Right. So if you're like a level 120 and you've been that way since, I don't know, the last expansion, I think that's the highest level, or it was the highest level, right? If you were that level and you compared yourself to a level 60 player, you were far, far, far superior than that player, just because of the amount of time that you had to spend into that game. So if you are level 60 now, does that mean you are now a level 30 with the level squish? Is that how that works? Because you can't maybe you can't just say everyone between levels 120 and 60 are now just 60, because that's not fair for the long-term players. But anyway, we honestly don't know at this point. So we're going to get right into Ready Player One.
Yes. Now
we're going to talk about a fictional video game that incorporates many actual video games. In 2011, Ernest Cline wrote in my opinion, a great novel. It's not like one of the best science fiction novels I've ever read, obviously, and it has a lot of criticisms worth discussing or bringing up, and it has its detractors, definitely. But I think it's interesting enough, and it delivers on the promise that it sets out. This is a world taken to the nth degree of nostalgia. You know, we currently live in a society where nostalgia has value. You can make a whole YouTube channel and become a millionaire if you have the right knowledge and skills to, you know, just talk about pop culture. And that's pretty cool. It's a cool idea. But what if you take that to the next level? What if in the future everything becomes like a video game, a virtual reality video game that you can inhabit, kind of like the internet? Ernest Cline took that idea and made it basically a huge Easter egg hunt. And it's just one of the most interesting ideas and concepts for a novel. When someone pitched it to me originally, I think it was like 2011 or 2012, they said, hey, you got to read this book. It's like you can go into the internet in a virtual reality world with your little avatar, and you can go to any world you want. You can play Lord of the Rings stuff, or you can go to Star Wars, or you can go to some anime world and play within those different worlds, and also like video games in this world. And I was like, that's a really cool concept, and how do they get the rights to talk about all that stuff in a book? But I read it anyway, and I actually really enjoyed it, and I'm happy that they made a movie. And speaking of the movie, it was directed by Steven Spielberg, whose titles in the past have previously influenced this work of the author. So it's kind of a weird cyclical thing where Steven Spielberg kind of influences this guy through his pop culture from the 80s to talk about it in his novel, and then Steven Spielberg then adapts that novel to film. And it's just kind of like a bizarre circle that they've weaved together. And I believe, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, I think the end of Ready Player One, the movie, kind of leads into Ready Player Two, the novel. Because the end of Ready Player One, the movie, goes into things they don't really touch upon at the end of the book. And I think I think we should get into that a little bit later. I don't think we need to hold off on spoilers. I think if you're interested in this book or film, you already know the plot. You already know that it's probably going to have a happy ending. You already know the basic gist. this is a world where they cram as much Easter eggs and little character references and things into as small of a canvas as possible. And it's really fun. Yeah, if you haven't seen that and you want to give it a go before you listen to this podcast, please go ahead.
Yes, I agree. The movie's been out for over 2 years now, and the book has been out for over 9 years. So we're going into spoiler territory. I do want to talk a little bit about the Oasis. The Oasis is really an interesting concept because, yes, it's a video game, but then it's also so much more than that. I mean, in the book, Wade goes to school in the Oasis. Like, he goes to class within the Oasis. There's an entire planet of schools called Ludus in the book that they don't really talk about in the movie. But it's really cool. The concept of the Oasis, there's just so much that could be done. You can play video games. I mean, people would do like day-to-day things. People would even work within the Oasis.
And they kind of show that off in some ways in the movie too.
Yes.
Even though they don't talk about like school in the Oasis, like on the planet Ludus, they do. Like when Wade is going through the stacks, you see people with their headsets on, their visors. You see one girl stripping in her stacks. I mean, she's got all her clothes on and everything, but she's clearly like on a pole and stuff. And you can kind of see how these different jobs, these different professions would translate into a virtual reality setting where you can still make actual money. And that kind of poses new threats. It kind of brings about new possibilities in terms of what can be done with the story. But the movie actually made a really interesting point. There's a really like tense and scary moment in the movie. And I think it's only tense because I'm an adult and I realize how much that would be like terrifying of a concept. In the beginning of the film, we find that Wade's stepdad, or it's like step uncle or something like that.
Yeah, it's like his aunt's boyfriend.
Yes, the aunt's boyfriend uses all of their funds to get out of the stacks in a gambling bed in the Oasis to get more money. Obviously, he's gambling. So
right, he was doing relic hunting, or artifact hunting,
right? Because
artifacts within the Oasis go for a lot of money. So he was pretty much trying to get that. He used all that money to get all this gear for his character, so that he can do the artifact hunting to pretty much sell the artifact so they can make money. So yeah, I see where you're going with this.
And he lost it all. He literally lost all of their savings in one fell swoop. And the idea of being able to do that, obviously you can in real life go to Vegas, say, and put everything that you have in the bank on the table. But the act of just going onto your computer and playing a video game and losing it all is even like just more terrifying and more like dystopian almost. It's almost like you can, and it's something believable too. Like it's a believable fear of like, this is like the next evolution of gambling vices. Is, well, I can beat the game if I try again next time, or whatever. And so that was kind of like a really powerful moment in the film. But you were touching on the Oasis as like a tool that everyone used on their day-to-day lives. Did you want to talk more about Ludus?
So what I want to talk about also is the differences between the book and the movie, especially the challenges. So the challenge in the movie, easy. It was a race. Mm-hmm. It was a really cool race, really fun to watch. In the book, it was a little bit slower because he had to go through a dungeon. Wade had to go through this dungeon, and the dungeon had traps throughout the whole thing. He had to traverse this dungeon, and when he made it to the end of this dungeon, he would have to play joust against this lich, and it was a really, really high-skilled lich. He failed several times until he eventually beat him, and that's where he got the copper key. Mm-hmm. I thought that was a really cool challenge. It would have been cool to see something like that in the movie, but I do think that it was really cool to see that race. That race was crazy because it was a compilation of King Kong and Jurassic Park and all sorts of like disaster craziness.
To be honest, I think that I prefer the way and I'm probably going to get some flack if, big fans of Ready Player One are listening to this. But I think in terms of the movie itself, you needed to tell a little bit about the personality of Halliday and somehow mesh it with stuff, with like actually exciting adventure stuff to watch and witness on screen, instead of the more technical or Easter eggy stuff that Ernest Cline was putting in his novel. So it's like he meshed together some of the exposition of like explaining like what Halliday was into, and also fitting them into how these games would play out in the actual film. And I think because Spielberg did that, he was able to tell it was almost two birds with one stone, if you know what I mean. Because to complete the first task, to get the first key, he wouldn't have known to do that if we hadn't had that little scene in like the library where you have James Halliday, the creator of the Oasis, talking about, I wish we could just go backwards and
really, really fast. Yeah.
And I think that's what I love about the movie is, even though it's not a one-to-one recreation of the book, the spirit of the book is 100% there. Like he gets the feeling of the story, and he twists a little bit of the major action sequences in the book to fit better on screen. But overall, I think it's a more enjoyable thing. What did you think of the second challenge?
The second challenge was really interesting. They had to go into The Shining. I thought that was crazy because the second challenge in the book, they had to go to a shrine, right? They had to go to in the book for the Jade Key. I believe they had to go to a shrine, and it was like a really like it was like a Rush themed one or something like that. It was crazy.
Yeah. So, and again with the Jade Key, to like complete it, they had to recite the entirety of War Games, the movie.
Right. To get that was crazy. Yeah. He was like actually in it. So yeah, he was playing Matthew Broderick's character, and he had to recite the lines word for word to complete that challenge. So each key had its own challenge, and then to actually get the next clue, he had to find the location of the gate to use the key, and then there's like a whole other challenge in that. So there's even more challenges in the book. So the decisions that they used for the movie, I think it was really smart, because that movie could have easily gone on for a long time. Yeah. So I do think that the decisions that they made for the movie really helped streamline it, where as the book, it was a lot of digging. I mean, just to get to the first key took a while, because he was doing a lot of researching and looking and like, oh, let me check over here. And it was really kind of painstaking when you think it, like, oh my gosh, like he was really just like researching like crazy.
Yeah, so they didn't really get that across in the movie. Obviously, they had little moments of stuff where like they would like quiz each other on, like when he first met Artemis, and they were in H's shop. They were like quizzing each other on Halliday's favorite pop culture stuff, and that's one of those scenes in the film I think is probably weakest, because that's one of those scenes that they try to cram like all that studying into one moment, so that you understand that all these players know everything about Halliday in search for these three keys, and that makes sense. But I think it was a little forced in that moment. It was kind of like a one-upmanship game in that moment.
Right.
And but other than that, like, I think the film does a pretty good job of getting across the bigger themes of the book. again, without like removing any of like the heart of the book, because the book does have a lot of heart. It is ultimately a story of like good versus corporate evil, you know?
Yeah.
One thing that I think a lot of people overlook, and I noticed this upon my recent viewing of Ready Player One, is that there's no moment where they have to figure out where the third key is located. There's no the third trial, third challenge. In the beginning of the film, you have the bad guys, IOI, just kind of like surrounding Anorak Castle. For whatever reason, we don't really know up until that point. And then all of a sudden, right after they get the Jade Key, you have Anorak and his people already setting up camp at, or not Anorak, but you have the IOI team setting up camp at this place, and they create this huge dome. And it's like, how did they know that that was going to be the location for the third challenge ahead of time? And they never really explained that. But that ends up becoming the big battle at the end.
So I remember them using the orb
of Osavox.
First, they used the orb at the first challenge in the book.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that because the Easter egg hunters are called Gunters.
Yeah.
And so I remember in the book when IOI got to the first challenge, they set up the orb, and then all these Gunters would come and they would start like they were like literally in the book they're saying they were nuking it, hitting it with everything, and it wouldn't come down. And something that actually popped up into my mind was that in the book, H and Parzival, which is the name of the character that Wade's character's name is Parzival, and his friend is named H. And so remember, they had this like hangout in the book that it was like modeled after some like room in the 80s, and they had like VHS tapes and everything in the book. So I think that H's workshop replaced that.
Okay. Although
and then IROC.
There is that one scene where Wade's getting ready for the party and he's changing outfits, and they're in like an 80s themed room with a bunch of like 80s posters. So that might be their little hangout. Okay,
I think that was in the workshop.
Was that also the workshop?
Like, okay. I think that might have been a room in the workshop. And also IROC,
mm-hmm.
which was one of the villains in the film. He was actually one of their quote unquote friends in the book that was really annoying to both of them. And when they got the keys, or when Parzival had gotten the key, IROC was like, "Oh, I know him." So he like kind of like sold him out so like everybody would find him. But yeah, remember IROC in the book?
Yeah. And he's a totally different person in the movie.
Yeah, he's a villain.
He's a villainous dude. What else? So I think we should talk a little bit about like a common criticism that's leveled on the film or the book is that it's just a bunch of Easter eggs crammed into a story. And to some extent, they're not wrong.
Yeah.
But to criticize the book for something that it promised to do seems a little nitpicky, or it seems very nitpicky.
Right.
You know,
you're going into that book knowing this. Really, you're knowing
what
it is.
That's the boundary of this world. Everyone's trying to learn as much about pop culture because Halliday was a huge fan of pop culture, not just 70s and 80s stuff, but some of the 90s, as well as like anime and stuff from that era. So people were just huge fans of pop culture, or at least they studied it to the point where they knew everything about it, because Halliday knew everything about it, and everyone knew everything because they wanted to win the prize, which was their shares of the Oasis, which is like $500 billion or something like that.
Right. Yeah. He would win. So the prize was like a $1 trillion or $3 trillion or something like that, and a controlling stake in the company, which was like 51%.
It has to be 51, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. But yeah, to level that criticism on the story seems disingenuous. When they first announced that Ready Player 2, or maybe not when they first announced it, but recently, within the past year, I remember like they made an announcement that it was going to be coming on this date. And I don't know exactly what date it is. It's sometime in November. But
I think it's the 24th.
Okay, so the 24th of November. All the comments on Twitter were, oh, wow, it's going to be notice this Easter egg, part 2, or just a bunch of like snarky remarks on like the quality of the book or the quality of the actual project. And I felt that was just kind of mean-spirited. It is mean-spirited, because just because someone likes something because it is a nostalgia fest doesn't make it not good. But at the same time, I can see like just going through like some of the challenges that they had to go through, and then how that was changed from the book to the film. The challenges were much more pop culture heavy. Like there was a lot more narrative stuff that needed to go on behind the scenes for you to understand what was in Wade Watt's head as he is explaining like this Easter egg and that Easter egg and this reference and that reference. So they can't really explain that in the film. So again, I like how they kind of just truncated it for the film. They showed Easter eggs and stuff and references on the side, but in terms of the actual book, like if you're just gonna read like a basic summary of the plot, it's gonna make no sense. Like if you just read a summary on Wikipedia, because it's literally just this reference, then they get the key, this reference, and they find love, and then so on and so forth. It's gonna seem all over the place. You know what I'm saying?
Which in a way it kind of is, but it makes a little bit more sense when you're reading it. And this book is just the book and even the film. It's one giant fan service dream.
Yes.
And a lot of people just don't like fan service. And sometimes I don't understand that, because I understand in a way that sometimes fan service can be a little forced and sometimes unwarranted.
Right.
But you do want fan service at times, because really, who's watching this stuff? Fans. Especially Star Wars stuff. Sometimes they'll pop in something in a Star Wars film and somebody will be like, oh, that's fan service. Well, who else is watching it?
Speaking of Star Wars, Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 1 just came out, and I think both of us are very clear that we really enjoyed it.
Yes.
But I will say that I think that the fan servicey stuff in Mandalorian is way better handled than the current films.
Oh, it really is.
And that's disappointing, because the films are supposed to be the cream of the crop,
Right.
But anyway, without getting too much out on tangent, I do think Mandalorian is just like top notch right now. I'm so excited I think the second episode comes tomorrow.
So Dakota and I will be making an episode on season 2. I would say maybe a couple of months afterwards.
Yeah, maybe it ends mid-December. So
just so that we can get into an area where we can talk about spoilers. I think that doing it too soon after the season ends doesn't give enough people to catch up, because some people like to binge it. So
maybe mid-January sometime, or early January. So
yes, that sounds great. All right, so back to the topic.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I don't think I've ever recounted this story to anyone, so you guys are the first to hear this very embarrassing story of my youth. I went on my old family computer to HP, and I was in Microsoft Word, and I typed out what I assumed was the longest sentence of all time. But it was a really stupid sentence. It was, I know and then I listed every single Dragon Ball Z character that I knew, and it was like 150 characters. So it was like Goku, comma, Gohan, comma, anyway. So I did that, and I showed my dad, and I was like, "Is this the longest sentence of all time?" I was a kid, and he's just like, "No, it's not a real sentence. It doesn't work."
That sounds like your dad.
And I think my dad
awesome.
actually handled it pretty well. He didn't try to hurt my feelings or anything like that. It's not like that. But it kind of reminded me. I was thinking about Ready Player One today, and that popped into my head. Just because you can list off a bunch of random facts or list off a bunch of names of different things that you know doesn't mean that adds anything to the story. Right. And I think most people, when they read this, they only see the author talking about the things that he knows. You know, they only see this reference and this reference and this reference, but they're taking that away from the story. These are things that are important to our protagonists, not just Ernest Cline. Right, yeah. And I think that is something that it's easy to take for granted, especially when you're talking about like fan service and like nostalgia fest and stuff.
I believe that the author is Wade Watts. I mean, I know a lot of authors do that, but I think that a lot of what we see in Wade Watts is probably who the author is.
Okay. What's interesting is the second book that he wrote. Actually, I don't know that it's the second book. I don't know if Ready Player One is the first book that he wrote. But the next book that he wrote after Ready Player One was called Armada, and it was very similar. You know, it's a book about like there's a lot of Easter egg references and stuff, and it talks, but it's more about like the real world and how you know what it is. It's like Ender's Game, but like in a modern day setting.
Okay.
Instead of like a futuristic society. Yeah, it's an interesting book. It's not as good as Ready Player One, but the protagonist is very similar to Wade Watts. So I think you might be right, or you might be onto something. He is kind of projecting himself into these stories, and I think that's kind of cool. You know, I mean, if you can do that,
I do
it.
I enjoy. Yeah, I think that it was probably easier for him to write these books because he's doing it from his perspective. Just, you know, like he's seeing things, he's seeing the world through Wade's eyes as himself, pretty much. Yeah. And that would probably be a cool way to read the book. I mean, when you're reading the book, obviously you're an outside, you're like an outside force looking into this world, but for him, he's Wade and he's seeing this world from the eyes of Wade, and I think that was pretty cool. And the real world in the book is kind of futuristic, but it's also kind of like nowadays, like it kind of makes sense.
It's a future that, like, you know, we can totally see happening.
Yes.
If things don't change, you know, it's they touch upon it really well in the beginning of the movie. It was one crisis after another, and people stopped trying to fix the solutions and just tried to outlive them. And I think we can start to see a little bit of that today with, like, you know, I just kind of want to live past this coronavirus thing, you know? I just want to get past it.
This is why we need the Oasis now.
You can see how all of these things you can just become like ambivalent to them. You can just become just totally jaded to life in general, and the Oasis is a form of escape, and it's the ultimate form of escape. And I think it's such a cool concept, but it's also, and the book paints it out just as well as the movie. It's also a scary thing, because at what point, what is reality? And it also asks the question, if the fictional world is better than reality, then why bother living in the real world at all? You know?
I'm not 100% sure, or I don't remember wholly how the book ends, but I do remember how the film ends, and I do like how it ended, in the way that you have this world, this whole virtual world where anything is possible, you can do anything, but the fact that reality is so much more important than that. And I liked how Halliday was like, he was talking about how important reality is, and that it's the only place that you can get a decent meal to eat, you know, that it's extremely important. And I do believe that something like the Oasis is very plausible. Something like that is very plausible, and I do believe that the author who made this book sees it. I mean, we're already seeing it. VR is up and coming. It's really starting to find its stride. The jump between something like the Oculus Quest 1 and 2, like the Oculus Quest is the VR that you don't have to connect it to a computer. You can just play it as is. It has the option to connect to a computer. And so that was pretty cool. But then the second one is even better. It's stronger. It's got, it has the ability to connect through your computer wirelessly instead of just through a connection. So, through like a hard connection. So I thought that was really cool. So yeah, man, I mean, VR
is gonna go places. Yeah, for real.
It really is. A lot of people might not have their mind on VR. I'm a little bit more tapped into the VR world. I have a VR headset, and it's really, really cool. I mean, I don't have a high-end one, but the things that you can do.
Well, neither did we.
I can see. Right. Yeah. I would say once they get past the feeling of nausea from wearing VR for too long, it's done.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the biggest thing. Like, a lot of people, they can't do VR because you have this thing in your eyes, and this thing over your eyes, and it bothers you.
It bothers your
and
senses
for a while.
Yeah. So
it makes you nauseous. Yeah. So yeah, no, a world like the Oasis is completely plausible once we get that technology up there.
The sci-fi aspects of this story, the idea that like the technological future is better than our reality, is something that's been a thing with sci-fi for a long time. I think of this is a weird deep cut, but in 1951, Ray Bradbury released a book of an anthology of short stories called The Illustrated Man. And they're all kind of interconnected little short stories, but one of them is called The Veit, the VEIDT, The Veit, and it's about children who spend all their time with this really technologically advanced home that kind of becomes their parents in a way. And the idea is that they were going on adventures in this home, like it was creating like scenarios for them to play in, and it eventually became more of their parents than their actual parents. So they kind of, their fiction became more of a reality to their children than the actual reality. So it's kind of like a scary notion that's been in sci-fi for over like half a century at this point. So,
right, yeah, they've been seeing this for a long time.
Yeah, some of the stuff that like early sci-fi like writers.
Dude, 1984.
It's coming true. It's coming true.
Yeah, in more ways than just like cameras and stuff. I mean, literally anything.
Yeah, It's interesting. There's so many sci-fi stories from the past that we take for granted, but are actually like, you know, roadmaps
like really
to the future.
Perceptive, man. It's crazy. Yeah,
it's cool though. It's pretty cool on them. Bad for us. We should talk a little bit more about the movie itself.
Let's talk about it. Yeah, we wanted to talk a bit about the book, just to note out the differences between the book and the film. The book, if you haven't read it, I think it's worth it. The film updated some things. They added some properties that weren't around when the book came out.
Yeah.
So I thought that was cool.
With the film, I don't know. I forget how I felt about it when I first watched it. I know I liked the movie.
Yeah.
But I don't think I loved it. Going back to it now, and having studied a little bit of Spielberg's work and like the lead up to this, which we'll talk a lot about in the next episode of Project Ecology, I noticed some major themes that prevail over most, if not like almost all of Steven Spielberg's works, and that's the idea of hope, even in dire straits, and adventure. And this story is quintessential Spielberg, and I think that's why he took it. And I think the idea of like that happy ending that isn't exactly what you expected, but it's kind of like what the story deserves, is something that like is really, really strongly Spielberg. While people don't see this as a classic Spielberg movie, I think in the future they will, Yeah. It wasn't like hugely successful critically, or I don't even think commercially, but I think it fits with the narrative of Steven Spielberg films like E.T. It fits with the happy ending of Jaws after like all the trauma that goes through it. It fits with like Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's, even though it's a totally different movie, it's a totally like futuristic set movie, it still has that like classic Spielberg feel, and that's what I love about it. I
mean, it's not the worst film that he's made.
No,
it's probably still yeah, I would say that it's probably in the middle of the pack. It's not the best, but it's not the worst.
Yeah,
I think that for some people they really loved it, some people didn't like it. I would say that I didn't hate it. I actually really liked it.
Yeah,
it's, for me, it's a little bit more than just being in the middle. Like, it was, to me, it was more than okay. I actually enjoyed it. I liked the changes that they made from the book. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was a cool direction, because with the way that the book was set up, he set up the Oasis to where, yeah, I mean, these challenges could have been anything. And the fact that the movie brought in different challenges, I thought it was cool, because it's like, oh wow, you know what? Yeah, one of the challenges could have been this,
Yeah. And let's talk about the final challenge, when Wade actually beats the game, or he doesn't beat the game. He just finds the secret room in the game Adventure.
Yes. Which was, I believe it was in the book too.
It was in the book, yeah, and that was
that was the last one.
And I think that idea of the Easter egg that you have to find, that was the first game that ever did that. I don't know if it was like the first thing ever to do that, but it was the first game.
Yeah, it was the first game to have an Easter egg, and I thought it was so fitting for that to be the last challenge.
Oh, absolutely! It's almost like a love letter to that moment, because for whatever reason, that moment stuck with Ernest Cline so profoundly that it made him want to write a book about finding Easter eggs in games, And I think that's such a perfect way to wrap up the story of Ready Player One, just as an ode to the long history of pop culture, and it's an ode to Easter eggs themselves. And I remember, like, as a kid, going through like old, like, I would just go through like DVD after DVD, pop it into the DVD player, and I would look online for like Easter eggs, because most DVDs actually had Easter eggs. Like, if you like clicked volume down, left, right, up, or something like that, it would take you to another screen, or another option would pop up on the DVD menu. And sometimes it'd be something as simple as like, this is the trailer for the movie, haha, look. Or sometimes it would be like an extra blooper reel that wasn't on like the DVD special list. So there's certain things that like people enjoyed. They even mentioned it in the Doctor Who episode Blink. Remember, there were 17 DVDs that all had that David Tennant speech where he talks to himself.
Oh yeah, dude, that was so crazy, because in each of the DVDs it was like a conversation, and he was talking to
someone off screen.
The girl, yeah, he was talking to somebody off screen, and it seemed like he was answering her questions.
Yes, from like the DVD menu. It was really cool.
That was really crazy.
That is one of the best scripts that Doctor Who's ever come out with, but that's for another day. That's just like an example of Easter eggs that even in popular culture that they talk about. So
I think it was fitting that this whole Easter egg thing, that it was a giant game, even though a lot of the properties weren't video games, because I feel like video games do Easter eggs the best. Yeah. I personally feel like video games do Easter eggs the best, because really in a movie you have to have an eye for it, but it's always going to be on the screen if you're perceptive of it. Video game, you have to wander.
What's your favorite video game Easter egg? If you could name just one. I have one lined up.
Why don't you go first?
All right. So one of my favorite games growing up was Jak and Daxter. For the PS2. It was a trilogy of games. I wish they would bring those characters back. I love the series so much. But anyway, it was created by Naughty Dog. The next title that Naughty Dog would create is Uncharted. And in Uncharted, there are, I think, 100 artifacts that you have to find, or that you can find if you'd like to. They're like little, like you'd have to wander a little bit to find them, and you're a treasure hunter in Uncharted. But one of those Easter eggs was a precursor orb, which, in Uncharted just kind of looks like a big egg. But if you have any idea of like what a precursor orb was from Jak and Daxter, then you realize, oh, it's an Easter egg for their previous game. And it's a literal egg, because it's in the shape of an egg. And I think that's my favorite. It's in each of their games, I believe. Each of the Uncharted games has a precursor orb. So that's something I'm a big fan of.
Okay, so it took me a little bit, and I actually had to look it up because I didn't remember 100% what it was. But one of my favorite games,
The Cake is a
all
Lie.
Times. Oh my gosh, dude! I love I love Portal. Portal is like Portal 1 and 2, hands down one of my favorite games because I love puzzle games.
Yeah.
Another one of my top games of all time is Ocarina of Time.
Okay.
And
that's a Zelda game for those who don't know.
Yes, so it's Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. It was the first one to come out for Nintendo 64, and I absolutely loved it. I remember playing it as a kid. And so there's a building, but if you look into one of these windows, you can see portraits of Mario and Luigi in the window.
That's awesome. I love that.
And so, yeah, man, Nintendo is actually really good when it comes to Easter eggs. They love doing their Easter eggs.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it's just Japanese games in general. They just love putting their Easter eggs in.
Another one, I don't know if you guys would consider this an Easter egg, but in all of the Final Fantasy games, there's a character named Sid. And it's not the same character because each Final Fantasy game, each numbered Final Fantasy entry is an entirely new universe that they created. So it's a different character every time, but you have to look through the game and find the character named Sid, S-I-D. Sometimes it's C-I-D, but yeah. I think that's just a fun little thing that they do in those games too.
They also put him in those side Final Fantasy games that go by the name Kingdom Hearts.
Never heard of it. No, actually, Kingdom Hearts is my favorite game of all time. So don't even front, Anthony. Yeah. Don't even front.
No matter how convoluted it is, I will always love.
At least the first game makes a lot of sense. As soon as you get to the second game, it's like, wait, what?
And then you start getting to all the smaller games. Oh my gosh.
So before we wrap this up, I want to talk a little bit about the ending of Ready Player One because it is something that's really interesting. We see Wade Watts win the 3 keys. He wins the prize thanks to his 1-up coin, and he meets Halliday in this system. And
it's like a recreation of his room as a kid.
Right, yeah. But the actual person that he's speaking to, Wade starts to realize this is more than just some simple program. There's intelligence there that is unnatural, and they don't explain it. But I think, and here I'm gonna read the synopsis for Ready Player 2, which comes out in a couple weeks.
I actually do like that Wade draws attention to that it's unnatural, because then otherwise then you would have needed to have the suspension of disbelief, like, oh well, okay, whatever, I guess he's wrong. But Wade actually pointed out, like, oh, you're a little bit different than the normal NPCs or a normal AI.
This is the synopsis for Ready Player 2, which comes out later this month. Days after winning Oasis founder James Holliday's contest, Wade Watts makes a discovery that changes everything. Hidden within Holliday's vaults, waiting for his heir to find, lies a technological advancement that will once again change the world and make the Oasis 1,000 times more wondrous and addictive than even Wade dreamed possible. And I think that has something to do with actually putting yourself into the game, like, for good. I think
that'd be crazy.
I think what happened with Halliday was he realized he was dying in the real world, and he put his literal consciousness into the game. And I think that might be what, because that's not something that's in the book, but that's something that's implied in the movie. I think in Ready Player 2, they're going to touch upon that idea a little bit. I might be totally off. This is a total theory of mine, but that might be what they're doing, is like actually putting people's consciousnesses into the game, because that would be addicting. Like, there's no death at that point. You know what I'm saying?
Was it that concept has been explored in other sci-fi properties, that somebody's consciousness gets put into another body or something virtual? So that would actually be crazy if they go that route. And I can see that, because like you said, at the end of the film he was much more lifelike than just like a regular AI.
And Ernest Cline was heavily involved with the making of the movie, so he would know he would know the plot to his Correct. Ready Player 2, which was already then announced, you know what I'm saying? So I think that might be where the story's going, and I think they left it open for a second movie as well, which is why I think they did that.
Which was smart. That was cool. Alrighty, well, that is and we didn't say, but this is actually our 9th episode. So yes, that concludes our 9th episode on Ready Player 1, both film and novel, and a little bit of Ready Player 2. Next week we are going to be talking about Jurassic Park. We're going to be talking about the making of, and obviously why we hold it near and dear to our hearts. And we can't wait. It's going to be great. We hope you give that one a listen, because it should be fun, just as this episode was fun. And yeah, Dakota, I will see you next week. Do you have any last remarks to leave everyone?
Yeah. First of all, this has been awesome discussing Ready Player 1. It's a story that I've liked and enjoyed for a long time. But next week, you guys better be there, because I'm going to blow your freaking brains out with all this random nonsense that I injected my skull with. All these facts about the making of this Jurassic Park. I have stories that I didn't talk about in the video that I'm going to be talking about in the next episode, and more. So, yeah.
Just in. Be there or be square. Just kidding. We love you all.
Yeah. All right, guys. Have a good one.
All right, bye.